Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The alarm's piercing sound shattered the quiet of the small apartment, dragging me from the remnants of a restless sleep. My hand fumbled in the dark, silencing it with a heavy sigh. It was 4:30 a.m., and like every other morning, the day began before the sun had even considered rising. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the day sink into my bones. Another day, another chance, I whispered to myself, a mantra I had repeated every morning since Brian passed away. It was the only way to keep going, to find the strength to roll out of bed and face the cold, unyielding world outside. Brian used to say that when times got tough, and it had stuck with me. Even now, 7 years after cancer took him from us, his words were what kept me moving forward. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the floor icy against my bare feet. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the soft, rhythmic breathing coming from Jason's room. I paused, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breaths. That sound, at least, brought a small comfort. I shuffled into the tiny kitchen, flipping on the light and squinting as my eyes adjusted. The room was just big enough for a small table and a couple of chairs. On the table, a pile of socks waited for me, all in various stages of completion. I picked up the nearest pair, running my fingers over the soft yarn, checking the stitches. Knitting these socks was a skill I had honed over the years, turning what was once a hobby into a necessity. The work was hard on my hands. My fingers were often sore, the skin rough and calloused, but there was a satisfaction in it too. Each pair of socks was a small victory, a testament to my determination to keep going, to provide for Jason no matter what. I set the kettle on the stove, waiting for the water to boil while I grabbed my knitting needles. The rhythmic click of the needles was a familiar sound, almost comforting in its repetition. It was a skill I'd learned from my grandmother, and I found solace in the repetitive motion, in the way the yarn slowly took shape under my hands. As I worked, my thoughts drifted to Jason. He had another long day ahead of him at that fancy school, and I couldn't help but worry. He was so much stronger than I had been at his age, but the weight of the world was heavier now, and I knew it pressed down on him in ways I couldn't always see. The kettle whistled, pulling me from my thoughts. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into my cold hands. It was a small comfort against the early morning chill, but it was something. The darkness outside was still thick, the city beyond our windows just beginning to stir. Jason would be waking up soon, and I needed to be ready to face the day when he did. I wasn't just his mother, I was his rock, his anchor in this unpredictable world. I couldn't afford to show weakness, not when he needed me to be strong. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 5:30 a.m., and the time was slipping away too quickly. I packed the finished socks into my old, worn-out bag, counting them out to make sure I had enough. Every sale mattered. Every dollar earned was another meal, another book for Jason, another step towards keeping us afloat. As I slung the bag over my shoulder, I heard a soft rustle from Jason's room. I peeked in and saw him stirring in his bed, his dark curls a tangled mess on the pillow. "Morning, sweetheart," I whispered, stepping into the room. Jason rubbed his eyes and blinked at me, still half asleep. "Mom, what time is it?" "Too early for you to be up, honey. Go back to sleep," I said, smoothing his hair. But I knew he wouldn't. Jason had always been an early riser, even when he was little. He sat up, squinting at me in the dim light. "You're going out already?" "Just getting a head start," I replied with a smile, hoping to keep the worry out of my voice. "I'll be back before you know it. You've got a big day at school, so make sure you have everything ready." "Yeah," he mumbled, still groggy. "You sure you're okay, Mom?" I nodded, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "I'm fine, Jason. Don't you worry about me. Just focus on your studies, all right?" He gave a sleepy nod and settled back into bed, but I could see the concern in his eyes. It was always there, no matter how hard I tried to hide my own struggles. Jason was too perceptive for his own good, too sensitive to the undercurrents of our life. "I'll see you after school, okay?" I whispered, brushing a stray curl from his face. "Okay," he murmured, already drifting back to sleep. I left his room quietly, my heart heavy. The days were long and hard, but they were all we had. I wouldn't let him down. I couldn't. By 6 a.m., I was out the door, the early morning air biting at my cheeks as I walked the familiar path to the corner where I set up my little stall. The streets were still mostly empty, save for a few early risers and the occasional car passing by. The city was waking up, and soon it would be bustling with life. But for now, it was just me, my bag of socks, and the cold. I reached my spot and set up my stall, arranging the socks neatly on the small table I had bought years ago at a yard sale. It was nothing fancy, but it did the job. The hours stretched out before me, another long day of selling socks to passersby who rarely stopped to look. As I sat there, knitting another pair of socks to add to the pile, I thought about the future. It was uncertain as it always had been, but I held on to hope. Hope that Jason would continue to excel in school, that he would make something of himself despite the odds. Hope that one day we wouldn't have to struggle like this. The sun finally peeked over the horizon, casting a pale light on the city. Another day had begun, and with it came the quiet determination that had kept me going all these years. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft, golden glow over the narrow streets of Detroit as I made my way home. My feet ached from standing for hours, my hands stiff from knitting socks in the cold. The weight of the day bore down on me like a heavy coat that wouldn't come off. But no matter how tired I was, I couldn't let Jason see it. I reached our apartment just as the streetlights began flickering to life. The worn-out door creaked open, and the familiar scent of home, faint traces of Jason's aftershave and the lingering warmth of our last meal, greeted me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and stepped inside. "Mom." Jason's voice echoed from the small living room. He was already home from school, his backpack tossed carelessly in the corner. He stood at the table, flipping through the mail with a frown. "There's another bill," he said, holding up an envelope. "It's marked urgent." My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile. "I'll take care of it," I replied, setting my bag of unsold socks on the counter. Jason glanced at me, worry etched in his eyes. "You always say that, but things are tight, and I know you're working twice as hard." His voice cracked slightly, and I could tell he was struggling to hide his frustration. I walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to worry about this, Jason. Your job is to focus on school. Leave the bills to me, okay?" Jason's expression softened, though I could still see the worry lurking beneath the surface. "Yeah," he mumbled. "But Logan and Eugen have been giving me a hard time again. They keep making fun of me for, well, everything. My old phone, my backpack, even my clothes. I don't care what they think, but sometimes it just gets to me, you know." I nodded, feeling a familiar pang of anger rise in my chest. Those boys had no idea what Jason had been through, what we had been through. They mocked him for things beyond his control, not understanding the strength it took to rise above their cruelty. But I knew that Jason was stronger than them in ways they couldn't comprehend. "Don't listen to them, Jason," I said softly, but with conviction. "People like that, they have nothing better to do than tear others down. You're better than that. You're better than them." He nodded, though his shoulders sagged with the weight of it all. "I know, Mom, it's just hard." "I know it is," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. His tall frame towered over me now, but in my arms he still felt like the little boy I had raised, the one who had always clung to me when the world got too overwhelming. After a moment he pulled away, wiping at his eyes quickly, though I pretended not to notice. "Thanks, Mom," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out," I replied with a soft smile, though the heaviness in my chest refused to lift. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. But sometimes I wondered how much longer I could keep this up. How much longer I could carry this weight alone. Jason retreated to his room, and I collapsed into the worn armchair by the window. The bills stared at me from the table, a constant reminder of the uphill battle we faced every day. I wanted so desperately to give Jason a better life, to shield him from the harsh realities that had shaped our world. But I couldn't keep the wolves at bay forever. The silence of the apartment was suffocating now, the ticking of the clock a relentless reminder of the hours slipping away. I buried my face in my hands, allowing myself a moment of weakness. It had been a long time since I cried, but the tears threatened to spill over now. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of our tiny apartment, casting a soft glow on the worn-out furniture. I stirred awake, feeling the familiar ache in my back, a reminder of the hours spent knitting the night before. Jason was still asleep in the next room. I could hear his slow, steady breathing through the thin walls. He needed the rest. It wasn't easy for him, balancing school and everything else weighing on his mind. I sighed and got out of bed, careful not to make too much noise. There was still work to be done before the day truly started. In the small kitchen, I set a pot of water to boil. The cupboard was nearly bare, but there was just enough oatmeal left for breakfast. As the water heated up, I sat down at the table and pulled out the latest batch of socks I'd been working on. Each stitch was a labor of love, a small token of sacrifice to keep our heads above water. I could feel the strain in my fingers as I worked, but it was a pain I'd grown used to over the years. Just as I was finishing the last sock, I heard Jason stirring. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. He gave me a sleepy smile, rubbing his eyes as he shuffled into the kitchen. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, sitting down at the table. "Morning, honey. How'd you sleep?" I asked, pouring the oatmeal into 2 bowls. "Not bad," he said, though I could see the wariness in his eyes. He'd been pushing himself too hard lately, staying up late studying for his exams. But I didn't push him on it. He had enough on his plate already. I set the bowl in front of him and he dug in, eating in silence for a moment before looking up at me. "You're working too much, Mom. I can help, you know." I shook my head, smiling gently. "I've told you before, Jason, your job is to focus on school. I've got the rest covered." "But it's not fair," he muttered, his brow furrowing. "You're doing all of this, and I'm just sitting here eating oatmeal like everything's fine. I should be helping you more." I reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "You are helping, Jason. Every time you get a good grade, every time you push through the hard days at school, you're helping. That's all I need from you." He looked down at his bowl, the tension still visible in his shoulders. "It just feels like I should be doing more." I squeezed his hand gently. "I know it's hard, but trust me, this is enough. You're my pride and joy, Jason. Everything I do is for you. And one day, all this hard work will pay off. You'll see." He nodded, though the worry didn't leave his face. We sat in silence for a few moments, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the room. As I watched him, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He was growing up too fast, forced to carry burdens no teenager should have to bear. But I knew that despite everything, he was strong. Stronger than I ever was at his age. "I love you, Mom," Jason said softly, breaking the silence. I felt my heart swell at his words. No matter how tough things got, no matter how tired I was at the end of the day, those 3 words always made it all worth it. "I love you too, Jason. More than you'll ever know." He smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for a moment, the weight on my chest lightened. After breakfast, I gathered my things, my knitting bag, the box of socks, and a few other small items I could sell. Jason stood by the door, watching as I prepared to head out for another long day. "I'll be fine," I reassured him. "You just make sure you focus on school, okay?" "I will, Mom," he said, his voice steady but still laced with concern. "But promise me you'll take it easy." I chuckled softly. "I'll try." With one last hug, I left the apartment, stepping out into the cold morning air. The streets were already bustling with life, people hurrying to work, buses rumbling down the road, and the distant hum of the city rising in the background. As I made my way to my usual spot, the weight of the day pressed down on me again, but I carried it with quiet determination. This was my life now, and as hard as it was, I wouldn't trade it for anything, because every step, every sacrifice was for Jason, and that made all the difference. It was another crisp, gray morning as I sat at my usual spot on the corner of Elm and Davidson, setting out the brightly colored socks I had knitted the night before. Business had been slow for the past few weeks, and the pressure was mounting. I glanced at the passers-by, hoping today would be different. Jason's words from breakfast echoed in my mind. "You're working too much, Mom. Let me help." His concern was genuine, and it gnawed at me, but I refused to let him carry the weight of our struggles. He needed to focus on school, on the future he deserved. The streets were starting to fill with people hurrying off to work. I called out softly to a few, hoping they might glance my way, but most of them were too busy, too caught up in their own lives to notice a woman selling socks on the corner. My heart sank as I watched them pass by, one after another. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me, sharp and familiar. Well, if it isn't the sock lady, I froze. That voice could only belong to one person, Helen. I turned slowly, and there she was, standing tall in her pristine coat, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. Helen and I had known each other in high school. Back then, we were friendly, but life took us in very different directions. Helen had married well, lived in a large house on the other side of town, and never missed an opportunity to remind me of her success. Helen, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Good morning. Still selling these? She asked, gesturing to the socks with a mocking laugh. You really should think about getting a real job. Maybe then you wouldn't be out here every day. I forced a smile. I'm doing what I need to do. She shook her head with a condescending grin. I suppose someone has to, right? And that son of yours, Jason, still at that fancy school on scholarship? Must be tough, keeping up with all those rich kids. My chest tightened at her words, but I didn't let it show. Jason's doing well. He's focused on his studies, and I couldn't be prouder of him. Helen's smirk widened. Is that so? Well, good for him. I'm sure all his classmates love hearing about your little sock business. She glanced at her watch. Anyway, I have a meeting to get to. Good luck with this. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there, the sting of her words lingering in the cold air. As the day wore on, I tried to shake off Helen's cruel remarks, but they stuck with me, gnawing at my confidence. By late afternoon, I had sold only a handful of socks, and my spirits were low. I was packing up to head home when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Excuse me, miss? I looked up and saw a man standing in front of me. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his eyes kind but filled with curiosity. He held one of my socks in his hand, examining it closely. These are really well made, he said, turning the sock over in his fingers. You knit these yourself? I nodded, not sure what to make of him. Yes, I do. I've been knitting since I was a child. He smiled, impressed. That's incredible. My name's Richard, by the way. I run a small boutique downtown, and I think these could sell really well in my shop. My heart skipped a beat. You really think so? Richard nodded. Absolutely. There's something unique about them. Handmade, quality work. People are looking for that these days. He handed me his business card. Come by the shop tomorrow. We can talk more about setting up a deal. I stared at the card in disbelief. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. Thank you so much. Richard smiled again and waved as he walked away. I stood there for a moment, clutching the card in my hand, unable to believe what had just happened. The turning point I had been waiting for had arrived, and as I hurried home to tell Jason the news, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The sun had barely risen when I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at Richard's business card, my fingers tracing the embossed letters. The possibilities it represented swirled in my mind like a distant dream, one I wasn't sure I deserved. But I couldn't let doubt creep in. Not today. Jason shuffled into the room, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Mom, you're up early, he said, his voice thick with morning grogginess. I smiled and nodded, motioning for him to sit down. I have something to tell you, I said, the excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. He sat, sensing the importance of my words. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Yesterday, a man named Richard approached me. He owns a boutique downtown and I paused, hardly believing what I was about to say. He wants to sell my socks in his shop. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, seriously? He wants to sell them? I nodded, feeling my chest tighten with joy. He thinks they'll do well. He gave me his card and asked me to meet him today to talk about setting things up. Jason broke into a grin, the exhaustion from school and life momentarily forgotten. Mom, that's amazing. I told you your work is special. I laughed softly, the relief washing over me like a warm tide. It's just the first step, but it feels like a good one. Jason leaned back in his chair, pride shining in his eyes. You've earned this, Mom. All those early mornings and late nights, it's finally paying off. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand, feeling a wave of emotion rise up. This is for both of us, Jason. All of the sacrifices. This is what they were for. He nodded, his expression softening with understanding. I know, Mom, and I'm proud of you. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of struggle lifting ever so slightly. I glanced at the clock. I better get ready. I don't want to be late. Jason stood, stretching his arms above his head. I wish I could go with you. I shook my head, smiling. You've got school. I'll tell you everything when I get back. The walk to Richard's shop felt different that morning, as though the streets themselves were humming with possibility. The cold air nipped at my cheeks, but for the first time in years I didn't feel its sting. Instead, I was warmed by the flicker of hope that had been reignited within me. Richard's boutique was nestled between two large buildings downtown, a cozy, stylish little store with a large glass window displaying elegant garments and accessories. I hesitated for a moment outside, nerves knotting in my stomach, before pushing open the door. Richard looked up from behind the counter, a warm smile spreading across his face as he saw me. Janice, you made it. Come in, come in. I stepped inside, the soft scent of leather and fresh linens filling the air. Thank you for this opportunity, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He waved a hand dismissively. No need to thank me yet. Let's see what we can make happen. We sat down at a small table in the back of the shop, and Richard began discussing the details, how many socks I could provide, the pricing, and the possibility of expanding if things went well. My head spun with the logistics, but Richard was patient, guiding me through each step with a reassuring confidence. After what felt like hours, we shook hands, sealing the deal. My heart raced as I left the shop, the weight of the past few years slowly melting away with every step. I had taken the first step towards something bigger, something brighter than I had dared to hope for in a long time. As I walked back home, the thought hit me like a gust of wind. For the first time since losing my husband, I wasn't just surviving, I was rising, and it felt like the beginning of something truly beautiful. The success of my socks at Richard's boutique took off faster than I could have ever imagined. Within the first week, the shelves were practically empty. My socks were flying off them so quickly I could barely keep up with the demand. Richard called me on the second day, astonished. Janice, I don't know what kind of magic you put into these socks, but we've sold out again. You'll have to bring in more. I stood there, phone in hand, stunned. It was a problem I never thought I'd have, too much demand. I'll try my best, Richard. I'll get knitting right away. But no matter how many late nights I spent with my needles, I couldn't knit fast enough. I hadn't even had time to rest my hands before another order was needed. In just 2 days, I had earned what used to take me an entire month. I knew I couldn't keep going at this pace alone, so I made a decision. I reached out to 2 of my old knitting friends, Marlene and Evelyn, who had always been just as skilled as I was but had struggled to find consistent work. They were thrilled to help, and together we formed a small team, working around the clock to keep up with the sales. I can't believe how fast they're selling, Janice. Marlene exclaimed one evening as we sat together, our needles clicking away. I know. I replied with a smile. It feels like a dream. After 2 months, the income was steady, more than I had ever hoped for. I had made so much that I was able to set aside enough to buy something I had long wished for Jason, a new backpack and the latest model of phone. When I handed him the backpack, his eyes lit up with disbelief. Mom, are you serious? He asked, holding the phone in his hand as though it were made of glass. Yes, sweetheart. You've earned it, I said, my heart swelling with pride. No more second-hand gear for you. The change was immediate. The classmates who once mocked Jason for his old phone and tattered backpack were suddenly silent. The teasing stopped, and with it, the weight of their cruelty seemed to lift from his shoulders. Jason, in turn, began to soar. His grades, already impressive, climbed even higher. He came home with straight A's, his face glowing with pride. Mom, I got the highest score on the math exam, he announced one evening, waving his report card in the air. I hugged him tightly, feeling the joy of all our hard work paying off. It wasn't just the socks or the money or the things we could now afford. It was the sense that together we had risen above every hardship, and now the future looked brighter than ever.